The big meeting room on Earth went completely quiet. Every important person from every human planet was sitting there, waiting. Then suddenly, a scary blue light appeared in the middle of the room. It grew bigger and bigger until everyone could see a huge alien creature standing there like a ghost made of light. This alien was nothing like the friendly ones you see in movies. Ambassador Velkoth looked like a giant snake that someone had given 6 long arms. His skin was covered in scales that kept changing color from shiny silver to deep black, like oil spilling over metal. When he talked, his voice came from different parts of his throat at the same time, making it sound like 3 people speaking together. Admiral Kim Tae-min felt his heart beating fast. He had been fighting space battles for 20 years, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Next to him, Defense Minister Park So-young was trying to keep her hands from shaking. She had seen the reports about what this empire did to other planets. It was never pretty. The alien started talking, and his words hit the room like ice-cold water. Every person there understood that their entire way of life was about to change forever. The empire had been watching humans for years, counting their ships, mapping their colonies, learning their weaknesses. Now they wanted everything humans had built. 30 rotations meant 30 days in Earth time. 30 days to give up everything their grandparents had died fighting for. 30 days to become slaves to creatures they had never even met before. Kim Tae-min looked around the room at faces he knew well. There was Governor Lee Sung-ho from the farming planet New Seoul, whose people had spent 50 years turning dead rock into green fields. Captain Jung Hae-won represented the mining colonies, where families worked in dangerous tunnels to dig up metals that kept human civilization running. Dr. Kang Min-soo spoke for the research stations, where scientists were discovering amazing things about the universe every single day. All these people had one thing in common. Their families had left Earth because they wanted to be free. Some came from places where governments told people what to think. Others escaped wars that never seemed to end. A few were running from poverty that crushed dreams before they could grow. But they all came to space looking for the same thing, a chance to live their own lives. The alien kept talking, showing them pictures that made everyone's blood run cold. Huge warships that looked like metal mountains floating through space. Planets that used to have cities and farms, now turned into glowing balls of melted rock. The Empire had destroyed 17 different alien races in the past 100 years. Each time they had given the same choice, surrender or die. Most species chose to surrender. They handed over their weapons, their freedom, their children's future. They became workers in the Empire's factories, soldiers in the Empire's armies, slaves with fancy titles. The smart ones, the Empire said, always chose to live. But as Admiral Kim looked around that room, he saw something the alien couldn't understand. These humans weren't thinking about being smart. They were thinking about their kids playing in gardens their parents had planted. They were thinking about the first time they saw a sunrise on a world no human had ever seen before. They were thinking about all the dreams that had brought them to this moment. Defense Minister Park remembered her grandmother's stories about the old wars on Earth, how people had fought against impossible odds when someone tried to take their freedom away, how they had won battles they should have lost because giving up was worse than dying. The alien finished his speech and waited for an answer. The room stayed quiet for a long time. Everyone knew this was the most important moment in human history. What they decided right now would affect every human baby that would ever be born. Kim Tae-min stood up slowly. His uniform felt heavy on his shoulders, but his voice was steady when he spoke. The words came out simple and clear, so there could be no mistake about what humanity had chosen. The die was cast. The war was about to begin. 3 days before the aliens expected their answer, humanity gave them one they would never forget. While the Empire's generals were still planning their victory parades, human warships were already moving through the darkness of space, like ghosts hunting their prey. Captain Lee Jun-ho sat in the pilot seat of what used to be a cargo ship called the Iron Mountain. 6 months ago, it carried grain and medicine between human colonies. Now it was packed with explosives and guided missiles. Its cargo bay turned into a weapon that could punch holes through alien battleships. His hands were steady on the controls, but his heart was pounding like a drum. The plan was simple and crazy at the same time. Hit them everywhere at once. hit them so hard and so fast that they would never see it coming. Make them understand that humans weren't going to roll over and play dead just because some alien empire said so. Jun Ho's ship dropped out of hyperspace right next to the Mordak supply depot, a huge space station that fed weapons and fuel to 3 entire alien fleets. The station's commanders probably thought it was safe, sitting way out here in the middle of nowhere. They were about to learn how wrong they were. All around the station, more human ships appeared like magic tricks. Freighters, passenger ships, mining vessels, even a few old cruise ships that rich people used for space vacations. None of them looked like warships, but looks can lie. Every single one had been turned into a flying bomb by people who worked day and night to get ready for this moment. The alien soldiers on the station started shooting, but they were confused. These humans weren't acting like any enemy they had ever fought before. Normal civilized species sent their fancy battleships to fight other fancy battleships. They followed rules about how wars were supposed to work. They tried to capture things instead of destroying them. Humans didn't care about any of that stuff. Lieutenant Choi Minji was flying a ship called the New Dawn that used to carry frozen food between colonies. Now it was flying straight at the biggest alien warship like a missile with a person inside. The alien ship's computers were screaming warnings, trying to figure out why this tiny human vessel wasn't turning away from their massive guns. Minji watched the alien ship get bigger and bigger through her front window. She thought about her little brother back on New Busan, probably playing soccer with his friends right now. She thought about her parents' farm where she used to chase butterflies through fields of corn. She thought about all the human children who would never get to chase butterflies if these aliens won. Her finger hovered over the eject button. In 3 seconds, she would punch out and her ship's computer would take over, ramming into the alien vessel and exploding. But as she watched, enemy fighters closing in, trying to stop her, she made a different choice. She turned off the autopilot and kept flying. The explosion lit up space for 1,000,000 miles in every direction. All across 14 different star systems, the same thing was happening. Human ships were appearing out of nowhere and hitting alien bases, supply lines, communication stations, and patrol fleets. The aliens had never seen anything like it. These humans were using their own ships as weapons, turning everything they owned into tools of war. General Thekvar, the alien commander in charge of this sector, watched his screens in complete shock. 12 of his major installations were already burning. His communication officers were shouting reports that didn't make any sense. Humans were ramming battleships with cargo vessels. They were turning passenger ships into guided missiles. They were fighting like they didn't care if they lived or died. The worst part was how organized it all seemed. This wasn't panic or desperation. Every attack was perfectly timed, hitting exactly the right targets to cause maximum damage. The humans had been planning this for months, maybe years. While the Empire was making threats and demands, humanity was getting ready to punch them in the face. Within 6 hours, the entire outer rim of the Empire was in chaos. Space stations were exploding, supply convoys were getting ambushed, and communication networks were going dark one by one. Emergency signals flooded the alien command centers, all carrying the same impossible message. The humans were winning. The Empire had expected an easy victory against primitive creatures who barely knew how to fly between stars. Instead, they found an enemy that turned every weakness into a strength, every disadvantage into a weapon. The real war was just beginning. The Empire's answer came from the sky like the wrath of angry gods. 3 human worlds died in nuclear fire. Their cities turned to glass, their people vaporized in seconds. The alien commanders thought this would break human spirit, make them beg for mercy and surrender. They couldn't have been more wrong. The news of the destroyed colonies spread across human space like wildfire. Instead of fear, it brought something much more dangerous: pure, burning rage. Every human who heard about those dead worlds made the same silent promise. The Empire would pay for every life they took with interest. On the mining planet called New Busan, Governor Han Seok-jin called an emergency meeting of every town leader, every mine supervisor, every school principal. The planet had 2 million people living in small communities scattered across the rocky surface. Most of them were simple folk, miners who dug rare metals from deep underground, farmers who grew food in underground greenhouses, teachers who educated children in one-room schools. The governor looked at these ordinary people and saw something extraordinary. He saw fighters who just didn't know it yet. Within a week, New Busan transformed into something the Empire had never encountered before. The miners, who spent their lives blasting through solid rock, became experts at setting explosive traps. The teachers, who knew how to organize classrooms and school events, became the coordinators of a resistance network that covered the entire planet. Even the children learned new lessons alongside their regular studies: how to spot alien patrol ships from miles away, how to send coded messages through their toy walkie-talkies, how to hide in the tunnels their parents had dug. When the Empire's elite Void Legions came to New Busan, they expected to find a scared population ready to surrender. The Void Legions were the Empire's best soldiers, genetically modified warriors who stood 8 feet tall with armor that could stop bullets and reflexes faster than any normal creature. They had conquered dozens of worlds without losing a single battle, but New Busan wasn't like other worlds. The alien dropships landed in what looked like empty fields, but the fields weren't empty. Sergeant Nam Hyejin and her team were waiting underground, hiding in maintenance tunnels that connected the farming domes. She had been a corn farmer before the war, spending her days driving tractors and worrying about weather patterns. Now, she was leading a squad of 20 farmers, armed with mining equipment that had been turned into weapons of war. Her grandfather's old stories suddenly made perfect sense. He used to tell her about the dark days when foreign invaders came to their homeland, how farmers and fishermen picked up whatever weapons they could find and fought back. He always said that people who worked the land knew how to fight for it, better than anyone else. As the alien soldiers marched across the surface, they triggered the first surprise. The farming equipment that looked abandoned suddenly came to life. Combine harvesters that normally cut grain were now cutting through alien armor with spinning blades. Irrigation systems that usually carried water were now spraying liquid fire. Even the grain silos had been converted into giant cannons that fired mining charges at the enemy ships. The Void Legions had never faced anything like this. They were trained to fight armies, not entire planets. Every building was a fortress, every civilian was a potential enemy, every piece of machinery was a weapon waiting to be used. The children who should have been in school were instead serving as scouts, using their small size to crawl through ventilation systems and report enemy movements. General Kethmar, the Empire's most decorated commander, watched his invasion force take casualties from enemies they couldn't even see. His soldiers were being picked off by farmers using tools meant for digging vegetables. His vehicles were being destroyed by explosives hidden in lunchboxes and toy robots. The hospital ships that came to help wounded aliens found themselves under attack by the very medical staff they thought would be neutral. The orbital grain, elevators that fed the planet, were dropping mining charges instead of food supplies. Even the planet's communication satellites had been rigged to broadcast false information that sent alien reinforcements to empty locations. This wasn't war as the Empire understood it. This was something much more primitive and terrifying, an entire world that had decided to fight back with everything it had. Every day the aliens stayed on New Busan, they lost more soldiers to an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The Empire was learning a hard lesson. You can conquer a planet, but you can't conquer a people who refuse to give up. 2 miles beneath the surface of Earth's moon, in tunnels that had been secretly carved for 20 years, Dr. Yun Ji-Hu stood before the most important button in human history. The Prometheus Protocol had been humanity's biggest secret, hidden from even their own governments until the war began. While politicians made speeches and admirals planned battles, thousands of engineers and workers had been building something that would change everything. The doctor's hands shook slightly as she entered the activation codes. Around her, massive machines that had been sleeping for decades began to wake up with deep rumbling sounds that made the moon itself vibrate. These weren't ordinary factories. They were automated shipyards that could take chunks of space rock and turn them into warships in less than a day. For 2 decades, cargo ships had been quietly hauling raw materials to Luna, telling customs officials They were building research stations and mining facilities. Nobody asked too many questions about boring industrial projects. Nobody suspected that humanity was secretly preparing for a war they hoped would never come. Now that war was here, and it was time to unleash humanity's hidden strength. The first ship to roll out of the lunar factories looked nothing like the beautiful vessels that other alien species built. Captain Bae Donghyun stared at his new command and couldn't help but laugh. The Prometheus-class destroyer looked like someone had strapped engines and guns to a flying metal box. There were no windows except for the bridge, no comfortable sleeping quarters, no dining halls or recreation areas. This wasn't a ship designed for long voyages or comfortable living. It was a weapon with life support attached, built for crews who understood they probably weren't coming home. Donghyun's crew was as unusual as his ship. His gunner was Park Jinwoo, a 19-year-old college student who had volunteered the day after his hometown was destroyed. His navigator was grandmother Kim Soonja, a 73-year-old retired teacher who had lost 3 grandchildren in the alien attacks. His engineer was Corporal Lee Jae-sung, a middle-aged factory worker whose wife was fighting on one of the occupied worlds. None of them were professional soldiers, but they all understood the same thing. Someone had to stop the Empire, and if the regular military couldn't do it, then ordinary people would have to try. The new human fleet didn't fight like any military force the Empire had ever seen. Traditional alien warfare was slow and formal, like a deadly chess game. Admirals would position their fleets, send messages back and forth, wait for orders from headquarters, and then engage in carefully planned battles that followed ancient rules of honor and tactics. Humans threw all of that out the window. Captain Bae's destroyer would drop out of hyperspace right in the middle of an alien supply convoy, blow up as many ships as possible in 30 seconds, then disappear before reinforcements could arrive. While the alien commanders were still trying to figure out what had happened, 3 more human ships would hit their bases on the other side of the system. The Empire's rigid command structure became their greatest weakness. When alien admirals found themselves under attack, they would send messages to their superiors asking for instructions. Those messages would travel through layers of bureaucracy while human ships continued their assault. By the time the orders came back, the battle was already over. But the most important thing the new human fleet did wasn't destroying enemy ships. It was sending messages, hidden transmitters on the Prometheus-class vessels broadcast encrypted, signals across the galaxy, reaching the dozens of alien species that lived under the Empire's boot. For centuries, these oppressed peoples had been told that resistance was hopeless, that the hegemony was too powerful to fight. Now they were seeing something impossible. Humans were winning. The broadcasts didn't just carry propaganda or empty some promises. They included detailed tactical information, weapon designs, and proof that the Empire's invincible fleets were burning across a dozen star systems. Species that had given up hope decades ago began to whisper among themselves. If these crazy humans could hurt the Empire, maybe freedom wasn't just a dream after all. On the industrial world of Keptar, alien workers began sabotaging the factories that built Imperial warships. On the mining planet, Vexilon, enslaved creatures, started collapsing tunnels instead of digging them. Communication networks that had carried the Empire's orders for centuries began carrying messages of rebellion instead. The Empire suddenly found itself fighting not just humanity, but the growing hope of every oppressed being in the galaxy. And hope, as they were learning, was far more dangerous than any weapon humans had built. The tide of war was turning, and everyone could feel it. The final battle began when humanity's largest fleet dropped out of hyperspace around the Empire's home system. Admiral Kim Tae-min looked out at the massive alien defenses surrounding their capital world and knew that most of his people would never see another sunrise. But that didn't matter anymore. This war had gone beyond survival. It had become about what kind of universe their children would inherit. The hegemonic throne world was protected by defensive stations the size of small moons, each one bristling with weapons that could vaporize entire fleets. Thousands of Imperial warships formed layer after layer of protection around their most sacred planet. No enemy had ever come this close to the heart of their empire. No enemy had ever been crazy enough to try. But humans weren't like other enemies. Kim. Taemin opened the communication channel that connected him to every human ship in the fleet. Captains who had been farmers just months ago, pilots who used to drive school buses, gunners who had never held a weapon until the war started. All of them were listening to his final words. His voice was calm and steady as he spoke. All ships, remember what we're fighting for. Remember who we are. Those simple words carried the weight of humanity's entire history. They remembered the children playing in parks that no longer existed. They remembered the homes that had been turned to glass by alien weapons. They remembered every human who had died refusing to kneel before creatures that called themselves masters. The Imperial defenses opened fire first, filling space with enough energy to power a dozen suns. Massive human battleships began exploding before they could even return fire. But instead of retreating, the human fleet did something that broke every rule of civilized warfare. They accelerated straight into the enemy guns. Commander Oh Soo-jin led her squadron of converted cargo ships directly at the largest defensive station. Her ships were taking devastating damage, but she kept broadcasting encouragement to her pilots, even as her own vessel began to fall apart around her. When her engines failed and her weapons went offline, she ordered her crew to abandon ship, and then rammed her burning hulk into the station's main reactor. The explosion could be seen from the surface of the capital world below. All across the battlefield, human ships were doing the impossible. When their weapons failed, they used their ships as missiles. When their ships were destroyed, the crews transferred to smaller vessels and kept fighting. Every human seemed to understand that this wasn't just about winning a battle. This was about proving that freedom was worth any price. Captain Jang Mi-young commanded a heavy cruiser that had been built in the secret factories under Luna's surface. Her ship was designed to carry the most powerful weapon humanity had ever created, an antimatter bomb that could crack a planet in half. The plan was to use it against the enemy's main fleet, but as the battle raged around her, she saw a better target. The Imperial flagship was a massive vessel that served as the command center for their entire defense. If she could destroy it, the enemy's coordination would collapse. But the only way to get close enough was to fly directly through the heaviest defensive fire in the galaxy. Mi-young looked at her crew, young faces that should have been worried about college exams and first dates, not the end of the world. They all nodded when she explained the plan. They understood what had to be done. Her ship punched through 3 layers of enemy vessels, taking damage that should have destroyed her a dozen times over. When the antimatter weapon detonated inside the Imperial flagship, the blast was so bright, it temporarily blinded every sensor in the system. The hegemonic command structure collapsed in that moment. Without orders from their leaders, the alien fleets began to fragment and retreat. Species that had followed the Empire for thousands of years suddenly found themselves facing humans who refused to die, humans who turned every weapon against them, humans who fought like the universe itself was at stake. The surrender came 18 hours after the battle began. The proud hegemonic High Command, rulers of half the galaxy, broadcast their unconditional surrender to a species they had dismissed as primitive just months before. Admiral Kim stood on what was left of his bridge, surrounded by the bodies of friends who had died to reach this moment. Through the broken windows, he could see the wreckage of both fleets drifting in space like a monument to the cost of freedom. The war was over. Humanity had won. But across the galaxy, the other alien species watched their human liberators with feelings that mixed gratitude with fear. They had seen what humans would do to defend their freedom. Now they wondered what humans might do to anyone who threatened that freedom in the future. The age of empire was dead. The age of humanity had begun, and the universe would never be the same.